What is up, brothers and sisters? Welcome to the Mitch Gray Show. Thank you again for joining us. It's been such a great year of guests and of content, and we've recorded a ton of episodes this year. So my last repeat, I spent the month of December having some of what I call my all-star guests on, people that just really made an impact in my life. And selfishly, I'm like, I have to continue that conversation. And so for you, the listener, you get to hear my selfish ambitions of continuing the conversation with great people. So today, our last show of the year for 2021, I'm bringing back someone who's quickly becoming dear to my heart, Micah Lorenc. Welcome back to the show, brother.
Thanks, Mitch. I'm happy to be back. I so enjoyed our first conversation. I was so glad when you asked me to come back. I love it.
Yeah. Well, we kind of got to the end of that. And I think I remember stating on the show, actually stating, we got to do another show.
Yep, we did.
There was so much information there. So Micah, that episode we're alluding to was episode 84, and that was understanding your strengths and how they impact your life. And for the listeners that maybe they saw that title and they're like, it's not for me, please go back and listen to that. For the listeners that did listen, go back and listen again, because we actually did a role play. I went through, you are a Clifton Strengths coach, and I went through the Clifton Strengths assessment, and we kind of went through my list, and it was interesting, right? Yeah, it was cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's what's funny about doing that process with people that I don't know if this was your experience too, is that a lot of people will hear me talk back to them some of the things that I know from the research that went into it, like what's true about people with that strength and how that might compare to other people. And oftentimes they're just like, they don't know what to think of it. They're like, yeah, that's totally me. And I've always known these things about myself, but I never really knew that they needed to be identified or called out or explained in this way. So I hope that was some of your experience too.
You know, it's you hear this a lot. If anyone has ever kind of gone through counseling or therapy, you hear this idea that a therapist, a good counselor, they'll help you put words to emotions.
Exactly.
And really that's the similar practice that's taking place in when you work through an assessment like that, and you get to reflect those points with a great coach like yourself, that it really puts words on all of the stuff that maybe you felt, you thought, you've been living, but you didn't know how to describe it. That's
exactly right.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful theme. So Micah, what we didn't get into last time, your business for the most part is really built on leadership and team development.
Correct.
And I had a gut feeling after I took that assessment, I'm like, okay, this might have to be 2 shows, because we knew what we wanted to do on the last show, kind of real world application. But really what you do in your business is help leaders and teams. You do a lot of team development work with businesses and organizations. And we have so many entrepreneurs, small business owners that listen to the show. And so I felt it necessary that we come back and talk about how we apply, how someone in a leadership position could potentially apply the process we talked about on show 84. And so to jump us off and to let you start talking, let's start with this question. If I'm a leader, what real value is there in me knowing my strengths, part A, and then part B, what real value is there? If I have a team of 30, 40, 50 people, however many, even if I have a team of 3, what real value is there in me knowing the strengths of my team, of my employees?
Yeah, I love that. And this is actually, like you said, this is very much what I do with my time as a coach and as a Gallup certified strengths coach, that is a little bit different from other people who are knowledgeable about the Clifton strengths. I have worked with so many people who have taken the assessment, and leaders, especially leaders in teams and organizations, who have taken the assessment and they think, whoa, this is cool. And then they don't know what to do with it. And they ask me that. It's like, well, now what? And that's very much like what I do with the teams and the leaders that I work with. And that question of like, why is this important to me? What do my strengths have to do with my leadership and how I show up as a leader? And that is my favorite thing to talk about. So when you ask that question, how does knowing my strengths help me as a leader? The thing that comes to mind first is, I don't know, I'm sure most people have heard these before, but didn't know where they came from. I always refer to Goleman's 6 leadership styles. I don't know if you've heard of those before.
Yes.
I want to describe like a 5-second explanation of each of the 6 leadership styles. And I don't know if you have your strengths up or if you remember what some of your top 10 strengths were, but as you listen to these, I want you to just, without even thinking about your strengths, tell me at the end of this, which 1 or 2 of these resonates with you the most, okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So one of them is called visionary leadership. And it's very much like, I'm going to motivate people to follow me. Like, come with me on this journey. They feel motivated. There's confidence in it. The second leadership style is coaching, where it's very much, I'm focused on developing you, and I'm going to give you some pointers. Why don't you try this and experiment? And you're kind of pushing people along and have the patience to see them grow into what you know their potential is. The third is affiliative. This is a people first mentality. It's really just like, it's great if we can accomplish what we need to accomplish. That's still important, but people come first. The fourth is democratic. This is a what do you think kind of leadership style, where you don't just make all the decisions yourself as a leader. You want to know what everybody thinks and get buy-in from everybody so that we're all going in the same direction together. The fifth one is pace setting. This is a do as I do. Hardworking leaders that are very much in the weeds. Their arms are deep in the mud, getting work done with their people and kind of setting that pace. And then the last one is called commanding. It's almost like a do what I tell you to do. It demands immediate action, and I'm going to tell you how to go about doing this. I think of like military leaders as this commanding leadership style when people's lives are on the line. And it's like, you're going to do this and you're going to do it now. Right. Or maybe it's compliance in regulatory industries or industries where that's important to you as a leader. Sometimes you do have to say, like, this is what you're going to do and you're going to do it now. So I'll pause there. Did 1 or 2 of those like stick out to you, you personally as a leader?
Yeah, I would say my first response would be I wrote those down as you were saying them.
Yeah.
I would say I'm a bit of the first 3, visionary, coaching, and affiliative. My visionary sense, though, is less about here's the vision, follow me, and more about empowering the vision of each person.
Ooh, cool. I like that.
So that's kind of where I threw in the coaching and affiliative elements. Yeah. I've kind of always been that way as a leader. Of course, as a teenager, I didn't know how to describe it, but even as a teenager, I remember thinking, I want everyone else to succeed and to fulfill their life's purpose and passion. Yeah. And I want to be the one that empowers the permission for them to step into that.
Cool.
And so, I love that. So yeah, I can sense those, all 3 of those. And I will say, I think the other interesting element to this is the other thought I had as you were talking. I do not respond well to commanding leadership.
I was gonna ask you which one was at the bottom. Like
I do not. Now I enjoy manual labor, and so I respond better than commanding. I will respond to pace setting because I'm a fast worker. But when it comes to, my dad always told me as a teenager when I had to fill out my military card so for those of our listeners that aren't Americans, because we have a large audience that is in America, as a man. And this may have changed, but it used to only be males that when you turn 18, you have to fill out your a military affiliate card. So if a draft happens again, you are now registered and eligible. So when I filled out my card at 18, my dad, who was a Vietnam veteran, tells me, son, don't ever go into the military. And if the draft comes back around, make sure you tell them you're a musician so they put you in the band.
He was looking out for you.
My dad knew me well enough to know that I don't respond well to
commanding leadership. Oh, so that's funny. My dad was in the Vietnam War too. That's interesting that we had a similar connection there too. So it's funny that you say that. A couple of things that you said strike me as like, here's why this is important for you to know your strengths and how that might show up as a leadership style. Because you said that visionary leadership resonated with you, that style resonated with you. And that's actually one of the least common I hear from people when I go through this exercise with leaders, and sometimes teams of leaders, very few people say visionary. And even the way that you said it was kind of tailored to your own approach. And I could hear some of your strengths when you were describing how visionary works for you, because you have in your top 10 dominant strengths, you have a good chunk of strategic thinking strengths and a good chunk of relationship building strengths out of 4 domains. So if people go back to the previous episode, you can review these 4 domains. There are 34 strengths total, and they fall under these 4 domains. The domains are executing, influencing, relationship building, and strategic thinking. And yours are those last 2 where you have a big chunk of that. I heard your visionary leadership in those 2 domains where, yeah, I have a vision. Strategic was your number 1 strength. So it's like, well, of course I have a vision for where I want things to go, but I don't want it to just be mine. And that's where the relationship building comes in. It's like, but what's your vision? And how can I support you achieving that? What a cool combination of strengths and leadership styles that would make your leadership style and leadership approach very unique compared to other people. And that's one of the biggest takeaways that I like to, I guess, encourage when I'm working with leaders is to stop looking at the leaders around you and seeing what they do well and think, maybe I need to do that too, because it's working for them. But it's working for them because their leadership approach is aligned with their natural talents and strengths. And so when we try to copy what works for somebody else, it's not as natural for us. It's like pushing against the grain. It's not genuine. It's not authentic. And I think our people can feel that. But when we accept other people are going to do things that don't come naturally to me, and they're going to be great at leadership in ways that don't come naturally to me, but I've also got great leadership talents and strengths too. And my leadership approach can work as well. And I can do what's natural to me. And I don't need to compare myself and my performance as a leader to the other leaders around me.
I want to affirm what you're saying. That is a challenge when I work with small business owners. Is there is in fact, I was talking to another small business owner yesterday, and the statement I made to her was, small business owners, especially because it's dependent on them to do so much work. And most of the time, they've never been in a situation to learn a new way of leading. And so they're so busy putting out the fires that the fires become the problem, and they're never the problem. They're a result of problems. And the other thing I want to affirm in talking about what's the phrase that people use now, kind of copycatting other people. There's a real popular phrase. I don't even use it. Imposter syndrome.
Oh, imposter syndrome.
I don't even use that phrase because it's a weird phrase to me. But anyway, but what's interesting about business leaders is the scenario you just painted about that imposter syndrome. You see that so often in 2nd generation family businesses.
Oh, interesting.
Because those leaders are brought up in the business and they see mom and dad, or they see grandma and grandpa, or whatever that looks like. It's kind of what I'm going to say. It's kind of an inbred system. And most of the time, those 2nd generation leaders have never experienced another environment. They've never experienced another ecosystem. And so they've never been exposed to another. And I can't tell you, I have advised countless 2nd, 3rd generation business leaders to quit their business. I can tell. And to move to quit their business and to move and work for another leader.
Wow.
Because cool. That's the only way they're really going to remove themselves and the emotion and the family dynamic. And so you could apply that even to if someone is a leader and brought up inside of a really unhealthy organization, or maybe they're brought up under a great leader. And so their response is, well, Micah's a great leader, so I'm going to do everything Micah does. Yeah. And I love you use the word alignment. If it's not aligned with your personality, with your passion, I like to always tell people it's okay to have imposter syndrome as long as you're using it as an entry point into finding yourself.
Yes, agreed. Yes, and if it's not taking, imposter syndrome can be a motivating factor toward performance and improvement if it's not you taking it as a reflection of your own self-worth. Yes. That's the distinction I make with people. When you start to hear that negative voice in your head that's saying this is, you can't do this, you're not capable, you're an imposter. That's that line that I think
Red flag.
the red flag you have to look for. But what's interesting about, I would never have thought about what you said about second generation small businesses, and that leaders you would mimic your parents. That's the only leadership you've seen. So I guess I have to do it that way to see success. But from even just broader organizations, there is a culture of leadership. What kind of leadership is rewarded? And what's sad is that sometimes it's commanding leadership or visionary leadership that seems to be rewarded so much in an organization. And there's a culture of incentivizing that style of leadership that when you don't fit the bill, you're marked as not a good leader. And it's like, that's where organizations get it wrong, is that there's got to be a leadership culture in an organization where you enable, empower, and incentivize or reward all leadership styles. Because I actually just did a workshop 2 days ago with a small company, and it was just their leadership team. And I showed them these leadership styles, and I asked them to pick the one or two that resonates with them most and the one that resonates with them least, meaning it would be least natural for them to exhibit that leadership style. And it was so interesting that in this team of leaders, there were very few people that picked the same ones. So for some people that picked commanding as the one that resonated with them least, there was a person that said, that's probably my number one. And it was interesting to hear everybody was different. And they're all figuring out how to be a leader by leaning into their own strengths and finding their own leadership style. And Goleman will actually, his research says, all leaders should be able to do all six. There are situations where commanding, even if it's uncomfortable, you've got to do it. If somebody's safety is at risk, if there's compliance at risk, it's like sometimes we just got to tell people what to do and how to do it and when to do it. But you can have your baseline leadership that is your go-to style and flex into these other leadership styles when necessary, and be okay with the fact that most of the time I'm a democratic leader. I want to know what everybody thinks, and I'm going to do what the majority wants.
And a well-rounded leader who is functioning the majority of the time within their natural leadership ability and bettering themselves in that area. When they understand, communicate, empower their people, they now have permission that when the moment demands to shift into maybe what's their more opposite type of leadership. And I can think back to my retail leadership days. And during back to school season and Christmas season, it was commanding leader time. It was pace setting leader time, because, you're doing $50,000, $100,000 days in sales. You don't have time to be the inspirational visionary. Now, what I learned through experience, because my first couple of years in management, I didn't communicate well, and I snapped into commanding mode, and people were like, whoa, what is crazy Mitch is on the loose now. And so I learned through experience that you have to gain and earn that permission, that when it's time to perform or time to make a decision or deadlines are ahead, that you've earned that right. And that's what I love leaders to really reflect on. You have to earn the right to maneuver and to lead well. It's not given to you, and you can't demand trust. That's the one thing I would say, is when you try and demand trust, you are actually doing more damage than good.
Agreed. And so taking this back, I love that. Taking this back to kind of the first half of your question, why is it important for me to know my strengths as a leader? How do I use that practically? I could hear and would have a conversation if you and I were to have an ongoing coaching relationship. We would start with that leadership style, and you would say, well, this is the way that I would lead, but I don't know why. Then we would dig into why, and we would talk about things like, well, you have really high strategic, really high self-assurance. Those two alone strike me as like where your visionary leadership style is coming from. And we would dig into that and recognize like, oh yeah, those are things that come naturally to me, and I have that to offer my people. But the fact that you went to affiliative and coaching too, I think that comes from things like connectedness and maximizer and developer. Those are three strengths in your top 10 that I think shift from being just visionary to being more coaching and affiliative. It's just cool to be able to not just say, this is my leadership style and I don't really know why, to dig in and start saying, well, this is why, and this is what you have to offer that might be different from other leaders. So just like you're looking at them and thinking, man, they're good at that, they're looking at you thinking, I wish I were more like Mitch in my leadership style, because these things come naturally to you.
And by the way, I want to follow up the part B of that question because it's really important. We don't go here necessarily as coaches, and I'm not saying to the listeners that you go here. If the listener decides to connect with you and hire you, I'm not saying you go here, but my mind goes here, and that is if you can reflect on what shaped you into the leader you are. And so, for instance, I don't respond well to commanding leadership, and I can look back in my childhood and and I can, and that is what I love about evolving as a human is giving yourself that permission to step into places that are really scary. And for those, I say this because one of the messages I preach constantly is you cannot separate professionalism and personalism. There is no separation. You don't remove your stress when you punch the time clock and vice versa. And so what I think is important for really leaders that are open-minded and ready to evolve and grow is that you start connecting those dots. Well, why do I not respond well to why do I really get ticked off when a visionary leader starts? Because I've heard people say that, they're like, all you do is share the big, okay, well, let's go back into your past and let's see where's that connective point. And why I think that's valuable for leaders is because of part B of that question. When you've walked through that and when you can begin understanding why you are who you are, you now become a better reciprocate of your people telling you why they are who they are.
Yes.
So let's go to part B. Let's go to part B.
There are a couple of things that come to mind just for part B, which is like, how do I use this with my team? How is this a tool for my team? One of them is just this kind of overall principle that you were just alluding to. And it's that when you realize that you've got a unique leadership style and you connect that with your strengths and realize I have a unique set of strengths, and you start to see the strengths report of the people on your team, you realize just how diverse of a team you have that you may not have realized before. And that when you as a leader expect other people to do their work the way that you would have done their work, you impose your will on other people and you become what we call a micromanager. Because you see a right way of doing things and you discount the fact that you've got all this diversity of strengths on your team and you're not empowering them to do things their way. And just that philosophy alone is a really powerful perspective of just knowing everybody's strengths and being okay with the fact that, all right, I need as a leader to set the outcomes. If I can set expectations that these are the outcomes that I want my people to achieve, and let them figure out how to achieve those outcomes and give them the empowerment and the flexibility to do it their way, you will see creativity and productivity and innovation in ways that you wouldn't have seen if you were micromanaging the way that everybody does their work. So that's number one. I don't know if you've seen that or talked to other leaders about that, but that's a pretty common perception that people don't like. Managers don't like to be called a micromanager. And yet sometimes they find themselves very much micromanaging because they see their strengths in the blinder and they expect everybody else to do work their way.
I think a lot of people don't see themselves as micromanagers because they don't have a clear view of what a micromanager is. They kind of have their own distorted view of, what they feel a micromanager is. And again, that's exactly what you're talking about. You're just reflecting your own definitions and perspectives onto, and so I want to go somewhere kind of quickly because this popped in my mind when you were talking about that. I want to go a little bit extreme. Let's say we have a listener, someone stumbles on this podcast, this episode, and they're just digging their heels in because this is fun topics for you and I. This is not a fun topic for a lot of leaders because
sensitive, right?
Yes, it is a sensitive. It's kind of what I like to call, it's kind of separating the breastbone and pulling out the heart and going, okay, we really need to deal with this. But what I do know is, and what we all know is, there's a labor shortage. Leaders are stressed out. It's the quote, great resignation, whatever anyone believes in that. That's the message we're hearing. And it is the experience of a lot of people. So we're not discounting that. So we've got digging heels in leader who's saying, look, man, okay, fine. You say it works, but I don't have time for it. I don't want to deal with it. I just need people to get a job done. Yeah. And that's the message I'm hearing from a lot of people. Even when I'm, my material and hiring and development, they're like, I don't have time for all of that. What is your response to digging heels in leader that is just
First, I would acknowledge that they're right, and that they are in a tough spot, especially as leaders who are seeing people leave their teams. Because what's happening when this happens, so the market for people job seeking is great right now, but that puts leaders and managers in a tough spot, because sometimes they're losing people just out of nowhere, and so their teams are getting smaller, but their work and their demand is not getting smaller. So what ends up happening is they can't replace those people quickly enough, and they put that burden on the rest of the people who are left on the team, which makes their workload overwhelming, which makes their job satisfaction go down, which makes them look for jobs too. So the first thing I say is, you're right. You are in a tough spot. You've got to get work done. You're probably shorthanded, and you're also trying to find more people to replace the people that have left. As far as what's interesting about this, and I know everybody's heard, I imagine most leaders have heard the example, I think it's from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, where he talks about how you have to sharpen your saw. That there are people that get sucked into this mindset that if I'm trying to cut down trees and I know I need to get through this many trees, stopping and sharpening my saw stops me from cutting down that next couple of trees. And yet, when you do stop and sharpen your saw, it creates more efficiency going forward, and it serves you better, so you can actually do better work and cut down more trees than you would have if you had been doing it with a dull saw, or dull axe. I'm not sure if it was a saw or an axe.
Either one works.
whatever it is. We shouldn't be cutting down trees either. So that's maybe an outdated analogy. But the idea is that a lot of leaders don't realize. We actually talked about this, Mitch, before the show, about coaching. You don't realize what effect it will have for your team until you've experienced it. And that's what I have met with potential clients who, when we talk about what we're going to do with their team, it's like a half-day workshop, and then maybe a little bit of ongoing coaching, an hour a month or 2 hours a month. And they just think, like you said, I can't afford that. We've got too much work to do. And they say no. And I'll have potential clients that are like, we can't afford that right now. Like the house is flooded. We need buckets. We need to be scooping this out. And the reality is that what I'm offering when we do something like the Clifton Strengths for your team is, you're trying to scoop the flooding out of your basement with your hands, and I'm trying to give you a bucket so that you can get there faster. And that's what I see in the people that do agree to do this work. They realize that by knowing people's strengths, I can actually let them be more independent. I can give them more autonomy, and I can give them more responsibility, so that not only are they more effective at their job because they're using their strengths, but weirdly, well, maybe not so weirdly, they enjoy it more. When people get to use their strengths, their job satisfaction increases, their productivity increases, and working relationships across team members increases. So you can let them be while you focus on these fires that you're having to fight. And it's counterintuitive, I think, for some leaders, that sharpening your saw or sharpening your axe really does create a more productive next phase.
And what you've identified, a few of them blatantly, but a few of them not so much, is the top reasons people stay at a job are job satisfaction, community, and bigger purpose.
Yeah.
And you've just identified that people, and what's crazy is when a leader can understand and get past this idea of, oh my gosh, I don't have time, I don't have the money, I don't have whatever, when they can step through that threshold and enter a new way of thinking, what they'll soon realize is asking your team to come along on this journey is actually giving them a bigger vision for not only their work, but their life as well.
Yeah.
And that goes further for retaining employees than money ever will.
That's so right. And you're communicating to them, I care enough about you, your well-being, and your career, to invest in you even during a great resignation, during times of trial.
That's exactly right. It's exactly right.
So
Micah,
go
ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say one quick resource before we wrap up that I think would be really useful for people, especially in a leadership team. While Gallup was doing, or in a leadership position, while Gallup was doing the research for decades on really what became the Clifton Strengths assessment and the Clifton Strengths philosophy, is they were doing, and they still do, a lot of research around engagement. And it's very much relevant, and it's a topic of conversation I have with leadership teams right now during the Great Resignation that I think people can go look up and Google on their own, and it's really valuable. So if you will Google Gallup Q12 engagement, and the Q is for question, there are 12 questions that Gallup has kind of derived from their research over the last few decades, where they say, if these 12 questions can be answered in the affirmative, you're creating an environment where you will more attract and develop and retain your people, which is very much the challenge that teams are experiencing, leaders are experiencing right now. And if you go over those 12 questions, start with number one. There's actually, it's kind of a hierarchy, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Right. You go from the bottom before you get to the top. And that's the same with these questions. You read questions 1, 2, and 3, and it's things like, do I know what's expected of me at work? Do I have the tools and equipment to do my job right? And do I agree with the mission and purpose of my organization? If you can start to answer those questions and work your way up, you're creating an environment where your team is more likely to succeed, to want to stay and be engaged in and invested in the success of your organization. So do that research on your own. I think it's a really valuable resource that a lot of people don't know is out there.
I'm excited to see that because I just 2 weeks ago created a new tool for initial potential clients. Nice. And where I ask, and actually I want to look at the rest of that list because a couple of the questions are the exact same questions.
Oh, perfect.
And so
well, now you have a lot of research from Gallup to support where you were going with that.
That's very cool. And in fact, I had a leader tell me the other day, after I gave him that tool, he was like, I've never thought about this stuff.
Oh my gosh.
And to be honest, Micah, that's the majority of responses I get from leaders is they're not taught to think about that stuff. So when you don't know, you don't know. And I quite frankly think that's 90% of people in leadership positions.
Oh yeah, I agree.
They simply don't know. And so I love that, man. I love it.
Beautiful.
Hey, Micah, I said at the beginning of the show, this is our last show for 2021. So I'm going to let you have the floor for a minute or two. What would you like to tell the people? We're moving into 2022. Oftentimes people see this as a new start, kind of a fresh slate. So you get to end the year on the Mitch Gray Show with your message, brother.
Awesome. Well, so I'm going to repeat something that I said earlier because it's so meaningful to me. And I think that especially at the beginning of a new year, it's a good reminder. And it's that I feel like comparison in general is very toxic. And yet we do it all the time. It's built in to our social media presence, seeing the best of other people's lives on our social media platforms, mostly talking about and celebrating our accomplishments, not sharing a lot of our struggles and challenges. And I think it's just a valuable reminder to remember that everybody's struggling with something. And as you look at something like the Clifton Strengths Report, you see, I have 34 strengths on this list, and only 10 of them come naturally to me. That means there are 24 other strengths that just aren't my thing. But those things are going to be easy for other people in my life. And if I just spend my life looking at other people, wishing I were more like them, that's not a life that we want people to be living. And especially as a leader, as an individual, at work and at home, I hope that something like this helps people draw a little bit closer to this realization that who I am is a good thing. Yes. And these strengths that come naturally to me are something that don't come naturally to other people. And I can show grace to other people for not having the strengths that I have. And I can show grace to myself about having strengths that other people do have that I don't. And that kind of reminder that as you start a new year, don't look outward and compare yourself to other people, but look inward and appreciate yourself, what you have to offer. And if we can increase people's self-acceptance and self-love, just a little bit as we start this new year, I feel like that would be a worthwhile task.
I love it. We're all human, so step fully into who you are as a human. Yeah. Our
Agreed.
mantra at the Mitch Gray Show is bringing the art of humanity back to leadership. And that summed it up well, my friend. Micah, this has been great. I love it, man. Brothers and sisters, thank you for listening to the Mitch Gray Show. Thanks for supporting us all these years. Really, we're excited for 2022, have some really cool stuff coming, but take some time and enjoy this holiday season. Take some time to enjoy the new year. And just take some time to, I just feel like in my heart that all of us, after the last few years, we just need a little peace. And so take some time for yourselves and your loved ones, and just, Thanks for listening to the Mitch Gray Show.